The galaxy had always been a large and complex place where many races lived, side by side and traded in peace, but also carried fear in their hearts because peace was never perfect and trust was always weak between different worlds, and the Galactic Council was the body that tried to hold all of them together and prevent wars from starting again and again. For many centuries, the Council had maintained balance with words and agreements until one day a new race arrived from a small blue planet far away and called themselves humans. At first, the Council thought they were another young species that would take decades to learn how things worked in the galaxy and how fragile peace really was. They were wrong. Humans came quietly but learned quickly. They adapted to every rule and system faster than anyone expected. Within a few decades, they had built trade routes, colonies, and small defense fleets. The other species found them strange because they looked weak, small, and fragile compared to the larger and more powerful races that had survived for thousands of years. But something about them was different. They were bold, curious, and fearless in ways that were not normal. They took risks that made no sense to others, and somehow those risks always brought results. Even when they lost, they came back stronger. The first time alien commanders met human soldiers, they felt confused because human armies were disciplined in ways they had never seen. They moved fast, followed orders with perfect coordination, and could fight for long hours without rest. The Council began to notice reports that mentioned how human troops could fight in storms, sand, or freezing cold, when others could not even move. One counselor once said that humans fought like they were born from war itself. Another counselor replied that maybe they were because their history was full of wars and struggles even before they reached the stars. The galaxy started to take notice, and slowly a quiet respect began to grow mixed with a strange kind of fear. Every major species had a military force to protect their systems, but most of them had grown used to peace and relied on technology more than courage. Humans used both, and when technology failed, they used their will. Reports started coming from frontier worlds where humans helped defend colonies under attack. Even small groups of human soldiers managed to stop pirate raids that should have wiped them out completely. The Council called meetings to discuss this unexpected rise of human influence because it was changing the balance of power. One counselor from the Treva species asked if humanity was preparing for war, but the human ambassador only smiled and said that humans always prepared for the worst so they could protect the best. It was a confusing answer, but also a warning. Rumors began to spread about a special branch inside the human military that did not appear in any public record. It was said that they were not ordinary soldiers. They were called special forces by their own kind. No one outside humanity knew what made them special, but every time a crisis happened somewhere on the edge of known space and ended too quickly or too cleanly, someone whispered that the special forces had been there. They never left proof behind, only results. Some alien officers refused to believe such stories and called them myths made by human propaganda, but others who had seen their work did not argue. They described battlefields where enemy forces vanished without traces, where operations finished with perfect timing, and where silence followed every mission as if ghosts had done the work. In one sector near the rim, a small mining colony was attacked by slavers. The distress call was weak and short because the main communication tower was destroyed within minutes. The Council's response would have taken days to arrive, but a human ship nearby picked up the signal and reacted in less than an hour. No one knows exactly what happened after that. The next confirmed transmission came 40 minutes later, when the colony reported that the attackers were gone. When Council inspectors arrived, they found no signs of battle except precise marks from small weapons and burned spots that showed professional strikes. The miners said that a small group of humans landed from a shuttle in silence and moved like shadows, and the attackers started to fall one after another. The humans did not stay for thanks or recognition. They left as soon as it was done. The inspectors wrote in their report that it looked like work done by special forces. That was the first time the Council officially heard that name. Weeks later, another story reached the Council from a distant station near the Vorn Nebula. An entire mercenary fleet had been preparing to capture the station for its resources, but before they could attack, every one of their ships exploded or shut down within minutes. The survivors claimed they saw nothing but flashes of light and small crafts moving so fast they were impossible to track. They said the humans had come again. The Council tried to confirm but found no record of any human fleet operating in that sector. It became a mystery that fueled more fear and curiosity. Inside the council chambers, debates grew louder. Some demanded to limit human expansion before it became a threat. Others said humans were loyal allies and would never break peace. The human ambassador only watched and listened without emotion. When asked about the special forces, he simply said that they existed to protect life, not to destroy it, and that they were trained to stop wars before they started. His calm tone made the other members uncomfortable because it sounded too confident, too final. They wondered what kind of training created such people. Meanwhile, among ordinary humans, life continued. Their soldiers trained in harsh environments. Their fleets patrolled quiet routes, and their scientists built better ships. They were not planning to conquer anyone, but they also refused to be weak. Their history had taught them that peace survived only when strength was ready behind it. Young recruits joined the military not out of hunger for power, but because they believed in protecting their kind and their allies. Many of them dreamed of becoming part of the special forces, though few ever did. The selection process was so secret and difficult that even within the military, details were unknown. It was said that candidates trained for months in isolation, surviving with minimal supplies, facing extreme heat, cold, and exhaustion until their minds became as strong as their bodies. Those who finished never spoke about it. They simply went back to their duties and waited for the next silent call. Across alien worlds, the stories continued to grow. Children of distant species whispered about the humans who never lost. Some traders refused to travel through human-controlled space out of superstition, saying that the spirits of their fallen enemies haunted those regions. The humans ignored such talk and kept working, exploring, and building. They believed that respect was earned through actions, not words, and they let their record speak for itself. Then came an event that changed everything. A remote moon under council protection was attacked by an unknown force. The local defense forces fought bravely but were overwhelmed. The attackers left no survivors except one damaged beacon that sent fragments of video across the network. The images showed strange movement, dark figures in the smoke, and then silence. When experts slowed the footage, they realized the attackers were not humans but something else, something not registered in any known database. The council was terrified, but before they could send help, the problem was already solved. The attackers vanished without trace. The only clue was a short encrypted message found on the main console of the moon base. It said simply, "Mission complete. No further threat detected." The file was signed with a human military code used by special forces. The council did not know whether to feel grateful or frightened. From that day forward, everyone in the galaxy understood one thing. When humans said they would protect, they meant it. Even the most powerful species in the council started to hesitate before challenging them. It was not just their weapons or ships that caused fear. It was the human spirit itself, their refusal to surrender, and their calm acceptance of death when it was necessary. Their special forces became legends not because they were the strongest, but because they were willing to go where no one else would go and do what no one else could do. Some aliens said humans had no fear of death. Others said they had simply learned to live with it. Whatever the reason, the result was the same. The galaxy started to respect them, and with that respect came a deep, unspoken fear. At night in the council chambers, some members wondered aloud what would happen if humans ever turned against the rest of the galaxy. Others said that such a day would never come, because humans always fought for something larger than themselves. No one really knew the truth. But one thing was certain. The name Special Forces had become more than a title. It was now a symbol, a whisper in the dark that reminded every world that even the smallest and youngest race could stand taller than empires when guided by courage and unity. And somewhere out there in the endless black of space, a small group of human soldiers prepared for their next mission, silent as shadows, ready to move when needed, not for glory or power, but because that was who they were. The galaxy slept in uneasy peace, knowing that when danger returned, the humans would rise again. And that thought alone was enough to make even the bravest counselors feel both safe and afraid at the same time. The news of the moon incident spread quickly through the galaxy, and every council member had their own version of the story and their own fear behind it. And while the council tried to appear calm, the tension could be felt in every word they spoke. The hall where meetings were held used to be full of polite arguments and slow discussions, but now every session turned sharp, because humans had changed the rhythm of the galaxy. They were no longer the newcomers trying to find a place among the old and powerful races. They had become a force that no one wanted to challenge, and that truth scared everyone more than open war. The council called an emergency meeting to investigate what really happened on that moon, and the large circular room was filled with voices from every world. The air was heavy, and even the automated translators had trouble keeping up with the shouting. Some accused humans of using the special forces to spy and interfere without permission, while others defended them by saying they only acted because no one else could respond in time. The human ambassador sat silently at the edge of the circle, calm and quiet, watching the chaos unfold around him. When it was his turn to speak, he stood up slowly and said that humans did not want war, but they also would not stand still when lives were in danger. He explained that their special forces were trained to react fast and to stop problems before they grew bigger. He said they believed in action when others hesitated because hesitation had cost them too many lives in their past. His words were simple but powerful because there was no arrogance in them, only truth. Some council members nodded while others looked away. After the meeting, the ambassador left the hall without another word, and everyone knew that nothing had really changed, because the galaxy still feared what it could not control. That fear became the center of endless conversations in every corner of the council's territory. While the politicians argued, the soldiers watched more closely. Many alien commanders had fought wars before, and they could recognize the discipline behind the human way of battle. They studied the reports and found something strange. In every mission where humans were involved, there was precision, patience, and silence. They did not use large numbers or heavy weapons when small ones were enough. They did not waste lives or destroy cities. They moved like machines but felt like people. One old general from the Valari species said during a private meeting that humans reminded him of fire, beautiful and warm, but dangerous when ignored. He had seen their soldiers work side by side with his own troops during a rescue operation years ago, and he said they never panicked, even when the situation looked hopeless. They simply found a way. It was that human habit of never accepting defeat that made everyone uneasy, because it was something no one else could match. In training fields across human space, the preparation never stopped. Every soldier followed routines that pushed body and mind to their limits. They ran under scorching suns and freezing nights. They carried heavy packs across empty lands. They learned to survive with almost nothing. To them, this was normal. They said that comfort created weakness, and weakness invited danger. The special forces were the example everyone looked up to, even though few had ever seen them in person. They were a quiet legend that motivated young soldiers to keep going when exhaustion hit. The human commanders never revealed their locations or numbers. Even within their own government, only a handful of people knew how many existed or where they trained. Some believed they operated from hidden bases in deep space. Others thought they lived among ordinary soldiers until called upon. The truth did not matter because their presence, real or not, was enough to make every enemy think twice. Far from human space, on a planet covered with dense forests, an incident began that would soon become another silent message to the council. A rebellion had started against the ruling species, and the fighting had gone out of control. Civilians were trapped in the middle, and the local army had collapsed. The council requested help, but no fleet could reach the planet in time. Then a small human ship appeared without announcement. It did not land at the main port but entered through the dark side of the planet where sensors were blind. The locals never saw more than a handful of figures moving through the trees. Within 2 days, the rebellion ended. The captured leader later told the council that it felt like ghosts hunted them. Every camp was hit from different sides at the same time, every weapon system jammed, and every guard silenced before he could shout. When the council asked for proof, there was none except the mark left on a damaged terminal, showing a human code. Once again, the only clue was the same short message: mission complete. This time the council did not even try to investigate. They were starting to understand that when humans acted, they did not ask for permission. But fear and respect are close relatives, and both grew together. Many young alien soldiers began studying human tactics in secret. They watched recordings of their training sessions, read about their history, and tried to understand how they stayed calm in hopeless situations. Some even started to copy their methods. The council noticed this and worried that humanity's influence was spreading too far, changing the culture of other races. Yet they could not stop it because even the best generals knew that imitation was the highest form of respect. Humans were becoming a model for military behavior, and that made their special forces more mythical than ever. Meanwhile, in the human command centers, there was no celebration. The officers saw none of this as glory. They only saw more work, more threats, and more responsibility. They knew the galaxy watched them with suspicion and they tried to act with restraint, but they also knew that peace was fragile. One wrong step could start something terrible. The special forces operated quietly, taking missions that no one talked about. Sometimes they evacuated colonists before enemy fleets arrived. Sometimes they recovered stolen technology. And sometimes they stopped crimes that could have triggered wars. Every mission was done with care and control because a single mistake could make the galaxy turn against them. They lived with that pressure and accepted it as part of their duty. There was a young officer named Hale who had served with the Special Forces for several years, and he understood this burden better than anyone. He had seen worlds burning, people crying, and soldiers dying, and he had also seen peace restored because of small, unseen actions. He believed that power meant nothing without purpose. He and his team trained harder than anyone else, not because they loved fighting, but because they wanted to avoid bigger wars. He once said to a new recruit that they were not trained to kill. They were trained to prevent killing. Those words became something his unit repeated often. It reminded them of why they existed. One day, Hale received orders to attend a meeting with the Human Military Council. The topic was the growing concern among alien leaders. They feared humans were becoming too strong and might dominate the council. The human commanders discussed ways to reduce tension. Some suggested open demonstrations of peace, others believed silence was better. Hale stayed quiet through most of the meeting, but when asked for his opinion, he said that humans did not need to prove anything. He said that real trust would come through time and actions, not speeches. His words were noted and accepted. Later that night, he sat alone watching the stars and wondered how long it would take for others to truly understand that humans were not looking for war. They simply knew that the best way to keep peace was to be ready for the worst. Across the galaxy, rumors of another operation started to circulate. Some said it involved a pirate king who had taken hundreds of hostages. Others believed it was about stopping a secret alliance forming against the council. No one knew the truth because no one ever saw it happen. But the result was the same. The threat vanished without a single ship destroyed. Some said they saw small flashes in the dark sky and then silence. The next morning, the hostages were safe and the enemy fleet gone. People started to say the humans had eyes everywhere. The legend grew stronger, and for the first time even the council began to rely on that fear to keep peace. Whenever tensions rose between two worlds, a quiet message was sent reminding them that the humans were watching. It worked. Fights stopped before they began. But not everyone was happy with this invisible balance. Some races felt insulted that their safety depended on human strength. They began to plot in secret, hoping to expose or weaken the humans. What they did not realize was that the humans already knew. The Special Forces had long learned that the greatest danger often came not from enemies, but from those pretending to be friends. Hale and his team prepared quietly for what was coming next. They knew another storm was building beyond the edges of known space. They could feel it in the strange silence between messages, in the movement of fleets pretending to patrol, in the way diplomats avoided eye contact. Something was coming, something big enough to test everything humanity had built. And while the council continued its endless meetings trying to decide whether to fear or trust, the humans continued their work. Their fleets moved like shadows between stars. Their soldiers trained without rest and their special forces stayed ready. They did not seek praise or recognition. They did not ask for trust or forgiveness. They only followed one rule that had guided them since the first day. They stepped into the galaxy. Protect life and never surrender. It was simple but powerful. And it was enough to keep hope alive in a universe where fear had become common. The council did not yet know it, but soon the day would come when that hope would be tested, and once again the humans would prove why even the common military was feared and why the word Special Forces had become more than just a name, but a promise written in silence. The galaxy had grown used to the idea that humans were strong, but no one had yet seen what they could truly do when pushed to the edge, and that moment finally came when a large fleet of raiders from the outer systems moved toward a human frontier station. The raiders were not ordinary pirates. They were trained fighters from different species who had joined together under one flag, hoping to test their strength against humans and to make a name for themselves by taking down one of their stations. They believed that stories about human soldiers were exaggerated and that no small group could resist a fleet of such size. They had no idea what they were walking into. The station they chose was small and quiet, built on a barren moon that circled a dying planet. Only a few hundred people lived there, and most of them were miners and engineers. There was one small defense unit, less than 100 soldiers, and they were not expecting any trouble. When the first sensors picked up the raider fleet, the commanding officer, a calm woman named Ree, sent a distress call to the nearest council outpost, but she already knew help would arrive too late. The raiders would reach them in a few hours. Ree gathered her soldiers and told them they would hold the line for as long as they could. None of them expected to survive. Far away aboard a patrol vessel, a message reached a small special forces team led by Hale. The code was short and simple. Frontier station under attack. Immediate response required. Hale looked at his team, 6 men and women who had worked together for years, and they all nodded without a word. They knew what had to be done. Their ship was not large, it was designed for speed and silence, and within minutes it changed course toward the moon. No one on the station knew they were coming. The raiders arrived first. Their ships surrounded the moon and began sending waves of drones and ground troops. The defenders fought bravely, but their weapons were too weak against the enemy's armor. Within an hour, the outer walls were breached. Smoke filled the tunnels, and the sound of explosions shook the air. Ree ordered her people to fall back to the inner core of the base. She refused to surrender. She stood in the control room with her weapon ready and her face covered in dust, still sending short messages into the void, hoping someone would hear. Then suddenly all communication went silent. The raiders' sensors started to fail one by one. Their drones stopped receiving commands. At first they thought it was a malfunction, but then strange things began to happen. One by one, the raider squad stopped answering. Patrols vanished without gunfire. Security cameras showed quick shadows moving through the smoke. The attackers tried to regroup, but their communications were jammed. Panic started to spread among them because they could feel something was there but could not see it. Hale and his team had landed quietly on the dark side of the moon. They moved through underground tunnels that only miners used and emerged behind enemy lines. They carried light rifles, silent and precise, and each shot found its target. They did not shout or use radio signals. They moved with hand gestures and short looks. Every move was planned and every second counted. Their armor blended with the shadows and their helmets filtered the smoke. Within minutes, they reached the center of the enemy camp and disabled their main power unit. The lights went out across the moon and the raiders were left blind. Chaos filled the air. In that darkness, the humans became ghosts. Ree's soldiers heard the confusion outside and wondered what was happening. Then her console lit up with a single encrypted signal. She opened it and read the words. "Hold position. Reinforcements on site." She stared at the screen, her heart racing. She knew that code. It belonged to Special Forces. She told her people to stay low and wait. They obeyed without question. Outside, Hale and his team continued their work. They moved from one enemy group to another, cutting through their ranks quietly. They used the enemy's fear against them. Every sound made them fire blindly at shadows, wasting ammunition. Hale watched them from the darkness and whispered to his team, "Patience." They waited until the raiders started retreating toward their ships. Then the humans struck. Explosions ripped through the landing area, as small charges planted earlier went off in sequence. Ships burned, engines failed, and panic turned to terror. The battle that was supposed to last minutes turned into a nightmare for the attackers. By the time dawn reached the moon, the field was silent. When Ree finally stepped outside with her remaining soldiers, she saw only smoke and empty machines. The raiders were gone or captured. Hale and his team were already preparing to leave. Ree tried to thank them, but they simply nodded and said their job was done. She asked who had sent them, and Hale replied that they came because humans protect their own. Then he walked away. Their ship disappeared into the sky before the council even realized what had happened. When the investigation team arrived later, they found no trace of the battle except precision marks and melted weapons. The official report described the event as a coordinated defense by local troops, but everyone in the station knew the truth. The special forces had saved them. The news spread faster than before. Across the galaxy, stories of the moon rescue grew larger with every retelling. Some said 100 special forces soldiers came. Others said it was only 3. Some said they used invisible suits. Others said they could move faster than light. The truth no longer mattered because the legend had taken a life of its own. In the council chamber, the incident caused both relief and panic. The human ambassador received dozens of questions about the operation. He listened to all of them and gave the same calm answer each time. Humans protect life where they can. That was all he said. The simplicity of his answer frightened many because it left no room for argument. Protection was not something they could forbid. Among the alien worlds, the reaction was divided. Some species admired the humans and began asking for military cooperation. Others felt threatened and demanded restrictions on human military activity. The council could not reach an agreement. During one heated session, a representative shouted that if humans could send soldiers anywhere at any time, then no one was truly safe. The human ambassador looked at him and said softly that no one is ever safe. That was why they trained so hard. The room went silent. There was truth in his words, a truth that every species had forgotten after centuries of peace. Safety was not given. It was earned. Meanwhile, Hale and his team were back in training. They did not speak about their mission. They simply moved to the next phase. New recruits joined them for observation, and Hale watched them carefully. He could see fear and doubt in their eyes. He told them that being part of the Special Forces meant carrying not just weapons but responsibility. He said that every mission required more control than violence. A soldier who could fight was common, but a soldier who could think under pressure was rare. He reminded them that the goal was never to destroy but to stop destruction. The recruits listened and understood that the path ahead would not be easy. Across human space, more stations requested additional defense systems and joint training programs. The government approved quietly. They knew that fear was spreading among allies, and they wanted to replace that fear with trust, so they invited other races to visit their training camps. When alien officers came, they were surprised. They expected to see advanced technology or secret weapons, but instead they saw humans running through mud, climbing rocks and carrying heavy loads. They saw soldiers encouraging each other, laughing even when exhausted. It was not their weapons that made them powerful. It was their will and their unity. Many of the visitors returned home with a new kind of respect. But far from all these visits and political speeches, new problems were rising. Intelligence reports spoke of a coalition forming beyond the edge of the galaxy. It was made of old enemies and bitter rivals who shared only one goal: to stop human influence before it grew stronger. They were tired of living in fear, and they planned to strike first. They began gathering fleets in secret and spreading false rumors to distract the council. Humans noticed the pattern but chose not to react yet. They preferred to watch and prepare. Hale's team was assigned to monitor the movement of this coalition. They traveled through empty space, following coded signals, collecting information. What they discovered confirmed their worst fears. The coalition was larger than expected and ready to attack soon. Hale sent the report back to command and received new orders. He was told to delay the enemy by any means necessary until the main human fleet could arrive. It was a dangerous task, but Hale did not hesitate. He told his team they would hold the line, just as others had done before them. As they prepared for their mission, Hale thought about the station they had saved, the people who were alive because of their actions, and the fear that still surrounded their name. He realized that fear was not their enemy. It was simply the shadow that followed strength. What mattered was how they used it. If their strength protected others, then fear would slowly turn into respect. He believed that one day the galaxy would understand, but that day had not yet come. The storm was coming fast, and soon the humans would have to face the largest threat they had ever seen. Hale looked at his team and saw calm determination. They were ready as always. In the darkness of deep space, their ship moved silently toward the unknown, carrying with it the hope of an entire species, and the legend of a name that the galaxy had learned to whisper with both fear and awe: the Special Forces. The quiet before the storm was long and heavy, and it stretched across the galaxy like a silent shadow, and everyone could feel it even if they could not see it yet, because rumors had begun to spread about fleets gathering far beyond known space and about weapons being built in secret places where no light reached, and the council tried to stay calm and keep order. But every race could sense that something was wrong. Reports came and went through secure channels, and most of them mentioned one name again and again: the Coalition. It was made up of several alien powers that had once fought each other, but now shared a single goal, which was to stop the humans before their strength became too great to challenge. They said humans were changing the balance of everything, and that their special forces were the symbol of that threat. The council held long meetings trying to stop the coalition from forming, but the words never reached far enough. The galaxy was too big, and fear traveled faster than reason. Hale and his team had been watching the movements for weeks from a small ship hidden in an asteroid field near the border. They had confirmed that a large enemy fleet was assembling, and it was only a matter of time before it moved toward human space. The situation was serious, and when the message from command arrived, Hale gathered his team and read the simple order. Delay them. No other instructions were given. They all knew what it meant. They were 7 against thousands. The mission sounded impossible, but that was what they were trained for. They prepared quietly, checking their equipment and reviewing plans. Hale looked at each member of his team and reminded them that their job was not to win, but to protect time for others to arrive. They nodded. There was no fear in their eyes, only focus. The coalition fleet began its move at dawn according to their local time. Hundreds of ships started their engines and formed a long, dark line that stretched across the stars. Their commanders were proud and confident because they believed humans could never stand against such power. They had studied human technology and tactics, but they did not understand the human spirit. Hale and his team had already slipped inside the fleet's communication grid, using codes taken from previous missions. They listened to every message, every command, and then they started their plan. Their ship was small enough to go unnoticed, and their first move was to disrupt the fleet's navigation systems. Using a series of signal bursts, they created false readings that made ships drift off course. The confusion began slowly, almost invisible at first, but then it grew. Captains started arguing with each other, blaming sensors and pilots. The fleet tried to realign, but Hale's team kept changing the data, until several ships collided and one of the main carriers was damaged. That was the first delay. When the coalition realized they were under attack, they sent patrols to find the source. Hale knew this would happen and had already prepared traps. He and 2 of his soldiers left the ship in small pods and moved toward a debris field nearby. They planted small explosives disguised as broken metal. When the enemy patrols entered the field, the charges went off, sending sharp fragments through their hulls. It was not enough to destroy them all, but it forced them to retreat. Every minute they lost was a victory for Hale. The coalition commanders grew angry and ordered an all-out sweep of the area. They wasted time and fuel searching for an enemy they could not see. Hale watched their efforts through his visor and whispered to his team to stay patient. Meanwhile, back in the council chambers, the mood was tense. The human ambassador had received news of the enemy movement and stood before the other members calmly explaining that his people were already acting to delay the attack. The other representatives were shocked. They could not understand how humans had known before the council itself. The ambassador did not explain. He only said that humans had learned long ago that waiting for permission could cost lives. His words left the hall silent again. The council realized that while they were still debating, the humans were already fighting for survival. As the hours passed, the coalition finally discovered part of Hale's deception. They found traces of human technology and realized a small team was responsible. The commander of the fleet laughed and said they would crush them within minutes. He did not know that Hale had planned for this too. The team had moved close to the main supply ship of the fleet and placed charges on its fuel tanks. When the commander ordered his ships to advance, Hale detonated the charges. The explosion was massive, and the shockwave scattered dozens of smaller vessels. Panic spread through the fleet. The coalition tried to regroup again, but their lines were broken. Hale knew this was the moment to disappear. He ordered his team to retreat toward a nearby moon, where they could hide until extraction. While they moved through the darkness, Hale thought about the soldiers on those ships, men and women from other worlds who were not evil but afraid. He knew many of them believed they were protecting their own homes from human expansion. He understood that fear could turn even the brave into enemies. He wished there was another way, but sometimes peace had to be defended by those willing to carry its weight. He pushed the thought aside and focused on the mission. They reached the moon and hid their ship in a canyon covered by thick ice. The temperature was freezing and the air thin, but none of them complained. They set up small shelters and waited for new orders. Hours turned into a day. They monitored the enemy fleet as it struggled to repair itself. The coalition's leaders argued among themselves. Some wanted to continue the attack. Others wanted to retreat and reorganize. Hale's interference had done more damage to their trust than to their ships. Finally, a message came through secure channels. Reinforcements were on the way. Hale smiled slightly. Their job was almost done. But before they could relax, the sensors picked up movement. A group of enemy scouts had found traces of their landing. Hale ordered silence. They watched as the scouts moved closer, unaware that they were being observed. When the first scout reached the canyon, Hale gave the signal. The team moved like shadows, silent and fast. They neutralized the intruders without a sound. Hale checked their gear and found a transmitter. The enemy fleet now knew their position. There was no time to hide. He told his team to prepare for extraction, and at the same time to hold the line if needed. The next hours were filled with tension. Enemy dropships began descending toward the moon. The humans positioned themselves behind rocks and ice ridges. The first wave of attackers landed and spread out. Hale and his team waited until they were close enough, then opened fire with precision. Every shot counted. The attackers fell one after another, but more kept coming. The humans kept moving, changing positions, using the terrain to their advantage. The battle lasted for hours. Smoke filled the air and the sound of gunfire echoed across the valley. Hale was hit in the shoulder but kept fighting. He shouted to his team to stay together. They did not retreat. They fought like they had trained all their lives for this moment, and in truth they had. At last, the sky above them changed color. A bright light appeared, followed by the shadow of large ships. The human fleet had arrived. The coalition fleet, still damaged and disorganized, was forced to retreat. Their leaders could not believe that 7 humans had delayed them long enough for reinforcements to come. Hale watched the enemy ships jump away into hyperspace and then looked at his team. They were exhausted, injured, but alive. He told them they had done their duty. Rescue shuttles arrived soon after and carried them back to the main ship. The medics treated their wounds while officers saluted them with quiet respect. None of them called themselves heroes. They just said they were soldiers doing their job. When the news reached the council, reactions were mixed again. Some praised the humans for saving not only their own worlds, but the fragile peace that existed. Others accused them of acting without approval and risking a larger war. The human ambassador listened calmly and said that if they had waited for a vote, there would have been no peace left to protect. No one had an answer for that. The council realized that humans did not follow fear, they followed duty, and that made them impossible to control but also impossible to replace. Hale and his team were given time to rest, but he could not stop thinking about the battle. He knew this was only the beginning. The coalition would return one day with greater strength, and the galaxy would again face the question of whether to stand together or fall apart. He sat alone in the observation room of the ship looking out at the stars and wondered how many more times they would have to fight before others understood that humans were not trying to dominate, only to survive. He believed that one day the galaxy would see the truth through their actions. For now, he was content knowing they had bought time, and time was always the most valuable thing in war. He closed his eyes for a moment and listened to the quiet hum of the ship. Outside, the stars kept shining, cold and distant but somehow full of promise. And in that endless space, the legend of the Special Forces continued to grow, carried by whispers, by stories, and by the silent respect of those who had seen what humans could do when the galaxy's peace was in danger. The galaxy had changed. Again, but not in the way anyone had expected, because the threat that appeared now was not from humans or from the coalition, but from something much older and colder and without mercy. It came silently from the dark regions beyond the known systems. And at first it looked like a cloud of dust drifting across space, but soon signals vanished one by one from colonies and stations and trade routes, and then the truth came out. It was a swarm of machines built long ago by an unknown race that had vanished before the council itself was formed. And these machines had no leader and no purpose except to consume and spread. They did not answer hails or surrender or feel fear. They simply moved like a tide that destroyed everything in their path. At first, the council refused to believe it until one of their own border planets disappeared completely within hours, leaving nothing but an empty orbit. Panic spread through every world. The coalition that had once sworn to fight humans now begged for help. Messages were sent to every system asking for united defense. The council called an emergency meeting, and for the first time all races sat together with the same fear in their eyes. The human ambassador stood quietly, while others argued about who should lead the defense. Some wanted to keep control, while others demanded humans take charge because they were the only ones who had ever faced a threat with such determination. When the room became silent, the ambassador said that leadership did not matter anymore. What mattered was survival. He said humans would fight and protect anyone who asked for help. The council accepted his words, and the galaxy began to prepare for the largest combined operation in history. Across every planet, soldiers and civilians worked side by side, building defenses, evacuating colonies, and sharing resources. Human fleets were sent to the front lines where the swarm was expected to appear. Among them were the special forces, including Hale and his team, who had recovered from their last mission and now were ready to fight again. Hale stood in the hangar of the flagship, watching his soldiers check their gear. They had all seen the reports and knew this enemy was different. It did not think or plan like others. It did not feel fear or pain. It could not be reasoned with. Hale told them that their mission was not to win a war, but to protect lives and hold the line long enough for civilians to escape. His voice was calm as always. He reminded them that courage was not about fighting without fear, but about fighting despite it. They nodded quietly and went back to work. The fleet moved out soon after. The first encounter came near a mining colony where the swarm had already started feeding on metal and power. Thousands of small drones moved like insects across the surface, tearing everything apart. Human ships arrived in formation and opened fire. The space lit up with explosions, but the machines kept coming, rebuilding themselves from debris. It was a battle like no one had ever seen before. Hale and his team were dropped onto the surface of the colony to secure the evacuation tunnels. They moved through smoke and fire, guiding civilians to safety while fighting off waves of metallic creatures that crawled out of every hole. The machines had no shape or face, only sharp limbs and glowing cores. Hale used his rifle, carefully aiming for those cores while shouting orders. His soldiers covered each other and pulled wounded civilians away from the flames. There was no rest and no pause. Hours passed and still the swarm came. When the tunnels were finally clear, Hale called for extraction. As they climbed into the shuttle, he looked back and saw the colony collapse behind them as the machines consumed it completely. He felt a heavy ache inside, but he pushed it away. They had saved thousands, and that was what mattered. News of the battle spread quickly. Across the galaxy, the same stories were told. Human soldiers stood their ground even when the enemy seemed unstoppable. Alien commanders who had once feared humans now fought beside them. They saw how the special forces moved with discipline and calm even under the worst fire. They never left anyone behind, not even wounded enemies. During one mission, Hale's team rescued a group of alien soldiers who had been cut off by the swarm. Those aliens had once been part of the coalition that fought against humans, but Hale never mentioned the past. He simply told them to follow and helped carry their injured. That act of simple kindness changed how many saw humans. The word fear slowly began to be replaced by another word: respect. The war continued for months. The swarm attacked in endless waves. Every system lost something, but humanity's courage inspired others to keep fighting. The Council began to trust humans completely, giving them command of mixed units that included soldiers from every race. Hale's team often worked at the center of these missions. They coordinated rescue operations, destroyed key hive structures, and trained others in survival tactics. The more others saw them in action, the more they understood why humans were different. They did not fight for pride or power. They fought because they could not stand seeing others suffer. One night after a long mission, Hale sat alone near the campfire on a ruined world. Around him were soldiers from many species eating rations and repairing their gear. An alien officer approached him and said that before meeting humans, he thought they were monsters, but now he realized they were the reason the galaxy still had hope. Hale listened quietly and said that they were all the same when fear came. The only difference was who chose to stand instead of run. The officer nodded and walked away. Hale looked at the dark sky and thought of Earth, of the small blue planet where it all began, and of the simple people who lived ordinary lives unaware that far away their sons and daughters were saving strangers they had never met. He felt proud but also tired. As the United Fleets pushed deeper into the swarm's territory, they found something strange at its center. A huge station built long ago by an unknown race pulsed with dark energy. It was controlling the machines. The Council decided to destroy it, but the defenses were too strong. Every ship that tried to approach was torn apart by energy beams. Hale's team was chosen for the impossible task of landing on the surface and planting explosives inside the station. They accepted without question. The mission began in silence. Their small craft slipped through gaps in the enemy fire and landed near a broken tower. They moved inside the structure and found endless corridors filled with flickering lights and machine noises. It felt alive, breathing through metal. They planted charges at key points while avoiding patrols of mechanical guards. One wrong move could end everything. As they reached the core chamber, they saw the source of the signal, a massive sphere of light surrounded by swirling metal arms. It looked almost beautiful and terrible at the same time. Hale placed the final charge and prepared to leave, but then the structure began to react. The sphere pulsed faster as if it sensed danger. Machines started moving toward them. The team ran through the corridors as alarms echoed. One by one they jumped into the extraction shuttle, just as the explosives detonated. The blast ripped through the station and the shockwave spread across space. The swarm stopped moving. Across the galaxy, reports came in of machines shutting down. The battle was finally ending. When Hale's shuttle returned to the fleet, everyone cheered. The humans had done what seemed impossible again. The Council sent messages of gratitude and promises of peace. For the first time since the war began, there was quiet across the stars. Hale and his team stood on the deck, watching the debris of the destroyed station drift away. They were covered in dust and bruises, but they smiled. They had survived once more. The galaxy owed them everything. Yet Hale did not think of victory. He thought of all those who had fallen and of how fragile peace could be. He told his soldiers to remember this moment not as a triumph, but as a lesson that unity was stronger than fear. As weeks passed, the rescued worlds began to rebuild. Alien families sent gifts and messages of thanks to human units. Statues were raised not only for heroes, but for the idea of courage shared by all species. The Council declared a new day of remembrance to honor those who had fought in the Swarm War. Hale and his team were invited to attend, but they chose to stay on duty, patrolling distant systems where small threats still existed. They preferred action over ceremony. They did not need applause. They only needed to know that others were safe. Everywhere, stories spread about the special forces, about the humans who fought without hate and protected even their enemies. Children from alien worlds began to wear uniforms that looked like theirs and dreamed of joining them one day. The legend grew not through fear anymore, but through respect and admiration. The galaxy had learned something important. It had learned that true strength was not about destruction, but about the will to protect. And in that lesson, humanity had found what it had always wanted. Not dominance, but understanding. Hale and his soldiers continued their silent watch across the stars, knowing that peace was never permanent, and that they would be ready again if darkness ever returned, because that was who they were. The guardians no one asked for but everyone needed. Years had passed since the Great War with the Swarm ended and the galaxy was quiet again, but the memory of what had happened still lived in every world and in every heart. People had rebuilt their homes and their cities, and trade routes opened again between races that once fought each other. For the first time in generations, the Council was at peace. The soldiers who survived were sent home or given new roles as protectors and teachers. Among them was Hale, who had led his team through countless battles and carried the weight of all of them. He had returned to Earth, but it no longer felt the same. He walked through cities filled with life and laughter, yet he felt distant because he remembered too much. He often looked at the sky and thought of the men and women who never came back, of those who had stood beside him and vanished in the dark. People called him a hero, but he never accepted that word. He said he was only a soldier who did his duty. One day he received a message from the Council asking him to attend a ceremony on a distant world where a memorial was being built for all who had fallen in the war. He did not want to go at first, but his team convinced him. They said it was not for glory, but for remembrance. They traveled together to the planet, which was once a battlefield but now covered in green fields and clear lakes. As they landed, they saw thousands gathered there, humans and aliens standing side by side. In the center stood a tall monument made of stone and metal, with names carved across its surface in every known language. The words at the base said, "We fight so others do not have to." Hale stood before it in silence for a long time. Around him, the crowd listened as leaders spoke about unity and courage and the price of peace. The speeches were fine, but what mattered most was the silence that followed, the shared understanding among all who had lost something. Later, an alien historian approached Hale. He had studied the human special forces for years and wanted to understand what made them different. He asked Hale how they had kept fighting when everything seemed hopeless, how they faced enemies stronger and larger and still never surrendered. Hale thought for a long time before answering. He said it was not about strength or skill or technology. It was about something simple, the will to protect. He said humans came from a small world where survival had always been hard, and they learned early that they needed each other. That was why they fought. Not for power or conquest, but because they could not stand seeing others fall. The historian wrote down every word carefully, and later used them in his book, which became known across the galaxy as the Spirit of Humanity. After the ceremony, Hale and his team spent time walking through the new city built near the memorial. It was strange for them to see humans and aliens working together so naturally. Children of different races played in the streets without fear. Shops sold food from a dozen worlds. Music from both Earth and distant systems filled the air. It was a small proof that peace could exist. One of Hale's soldiers, a young woman named Rhea, said softly that this was worth every battle they had fought. Hale nodded. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to smile. They stayed there for several days, meeting people who thanked them, families who said their lives were saved because of the actions of the special forces. Each story reminded them that their sacrifices had not been in vain. When they prepared to leave, the council offered Hale a high position to train the next generation of peacekeepers. He hesitated because he had never thought of himself as a leader outside the battlefield. But the ambassador told him that leadership was not about giving orders, it was about giving hope. Hale accepted. He returned to Earth and began working with young recruits. He taught them discipline and courage, but most of all, he taught them empathy. He told them that strength meant nothing without compassion. The new soldiers listened closely because they had all grown up hearing stories about the special forces, and now they were learning from the man who had lived those stories. Years went by and the legend of the humans spread even further. The council created a new alliance called the Unity Guard, made of mixed teams from every species. They trained under human guidance and followed the same principles of respect and protection. Every member carried a small emblem with the words, "We fight so others do not have to." It became a promise more than a motto. Hale often watched these young soldiers and felt proud. He knew that one day they would face their own challenges, and he hoped they would remember what humanity had taught the galaxy. That courage was not born from hatred but from love for life. On the 10th anniversary of the victory over the swarm, a grand gathering was held again at the same memorial world. This time the crowd was even larger. Hale was older now, with gray hair and slower steps, but his eyes were still sharp. As he arrived, people turned to him and cheered, but he raised his hand for silence and said that heroes were not the ones who came back, but the ones who stayed behind. The crowd grew quiet and listened as he spoke about peace, about how fragile it was and how it needed to be protected not only by soldiers, but by everyone. His words were simple, but they carried weight. After the ceremony, he stood alone before the monument again. The stars were reflected on its surface, and for a moment he thought he saw the faces of his lost comrades smiling back at him. Later that night, he sat near the lake watching the water ripple under the starlight. The alien historian who had spoken to him years before joined him again. He said that across the galaxy, people now studied human history, not out of fear but out of admiration. They taught about the special forces in their schools. They built statues and wrote songs about their bravery. Hale listened quietly and said that if those stories helped others choose peace, then it was worth it. The historian agreed and then asked him what he thought the future would bring. Hale smiled faintly and said that peace would not last forever because nothing ever did, but as long as people remembered what they had learned, it would always return. He said humans had a saying that every sunrise was a chance to begin again. The historian nodded and wrote that down too. When morning came, Hale watched the first light touch the horizon. He felt calm. He knew his time was ending soon, but he was not afraid. He had lived through darkness and seen the light return. He had watched enemies become allies and hatred turn into respect. He stood up slowly and walked back toward the camp where his team waited. They were older too, but still together. They laughed and shared stories of old battles and new adventures. They talked about families, about the young soldiers they had trained, and about the strange peace they now protected. For them, the war was never just about fighting. It was about making sure others could live without fear. As they prepared to leave the planet, Hale looked once more at the sky. The stars stretched endlessly, each one holding a world, a story, a life. He thought of how small Earth had once seemed and how far humanity had come. He knew that their place in the galaxy was no longer defined by power, but by trust. The council no longer feared them. They respected them. And that was the greatest victory of all. When their ship rose through the clouds, Hale felt something inside him settle. The hum of the engines was soft like a heartbeat, and he closed his eyes for a moment. He whispered a quiet thank you to those who had fought before and to those who would come after. The ship entered orbit and the view of the planet grew smaller behind them. Rhea turned to him and asked what he was thinking. He said he was thinking about home. She smiled and said that maybe it was time to rest. He nodded, but deep down he knew that even if he rested, others would continue the mission. The legacy would live on. Across the galaxy, stories of the Special Forces would be told again and again, not as tales of war but as lessons of unity. People would remember that when fear ruled the stars, it was humans who stood firm and reminded everyone what courage truly meant. And in that quiet, endless space where countless worlds shone like distant lights, the name of humanity carried a new meaning. Not danger, not conquest, but hope.